The sun was setting behind the red mountains when Maria heard the first scream. She dropped the water bucket she was carrying and ran toward their small adobe house. Her heart pounded as she saw smoke rising from the neighbor's farm. "Papa! Diego!" she called out to her father and younger brother, but there was no answer. Maria had lived her whole 19 years in this peaceful valley near the Arizona borderlands. Her family raised horses and grew corn on their small ranch. Life was simple but good. She could ride better than most men and wasn't afraid of hard work. Her mother had died when she was 12, so she learned to cook, clean, and help her father with everything. That night changed everything. The Comanche raiders came like shadows in the darkness. There was no moon, and the stars seemed to hide behind clouds. Maria heard the thunder of horse hooves getting closer and closer. She grabbed her father's old rifle from above the fireplace, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely. "Hold it! Maria, run to the hills!" her father shouted as he pushed Diego toward the back door. But it was too late. The raiders burst through their front door like a violent storm. There were 6 of them, painted for war and carrying weapons that gleamed in the firelight. Maria tried to shoot, but one of them knocked the rifle from her hands before she could pull the trigger. She watched in horror as they killed her father with a single blow. Diego, only 16 and still just a boy, tried to fight them with a kitchen knife. But he was no match for these hardened warriors. In minutes, everything she had ever known and loved was destroyed. The raiders bound her hands with rough rope that cut into her wrists. They did the same to 3 other young women from neighboring farms. The men loaded them onto horses like they were nothing more than cattle being taken to market. For 5 long days they rode across the burning desert. The sun beat down on them during the day, and the cold night air made them shiver without blankets. They got only small amounts of water and dried meat. Maria's lips cracked and bled. Her body ached from riding tied to a horse for hours without rest. The other women cried constantly, but Maria refused to shed a tear. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. Inside, though, her heart was shattered. She kept thinking about her father's kind eyes and Diego's laugh. Now they were gone forever. On the 6th day, they reached a dusty trading post that looked like it was built in the middle of nowhere. There were rough wooden buildings and corrals filled with animals. But Maria quickly realized this place traded in more than horses and cattle. The man who ran the trading post was a thin, mean-looking fellow with gold teeth. He looked at Maria and the other women like they were merchandise. The raiders spoke to him in English, a language Maria understood, but didn't speak well. "These ones will bring good money," the gold-toothed man said, walking around them in a circle, especially the tall one with the dark hair. He was talking about Maria. Her stomach turned when she realized what was happening. They were being sold like animals. Within hours, a new man arrived on horseback. He was tall and wide, with pale skin burned red by the sun. His clothes were expensive, but his eyes were cold and cruel. This was Jeremiah Blackwood, though Maria wouldn't learn his name until later. Blackwood looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl. He paid the trader in silver coins and loaded Maria and one other woman into a wagon. As they drove away from the trading post, Maria got her last look at the other 2 women who had been captured with her. She never saw them again. The ride to Blackwood's ranch took 2 more days. The landscape was harsh and empty. Nothing but red rocks, thorny bushes, and endless sky. Maria began to understand that even if she could escape, there was nowhere to run. They were in the middle of a vast wasteland. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Maria's heart sank even deeper. It was like a prison made of wood and stone. High fences topped with sharp wire surrounded the main buildings. Guard towers stood at the corners, and men with rifles watched everything that moved. But the worst part was seeing the other prisoners. In the dusty yard behind the main house, Maria saw people of all ages and colors working in the blazing sun. There were Native American children who couldn't have been older than 10. There were Mexican families who looked like they hadn't eaten a good meal in months. There were also black men and women who she realized must be escaped slaves from the southern states. All of them wore heavy iron chains around their ankles. Blackwood's foreman, a cruel man named Pete, grabbed Maria roughly by the arm. "Welcome. To your new home, girl, he said with a nasty smile. You'll work here until you die or until the boss gets tired of you. Either way, you ain't never leaving. They put the iron shackles on her legs right away. The metal was cold and heavy, and it rubbed against her skin until it was raw and bleeding. The chains were just long enough to let her walk and work, but not long enough to run. Maria was given a thin blanket and a wooden bowl. Her bed was a pile of straw in a shed with 15 other women and children. The roof leaked when it rained, and in winter, the wind blew right through the gaps in the walls. Every day started before sunrise. They were given a small portion of thin soup and stale bread, then sent out to work. Maria was put to work taking care of the horses, which was one of the few things that gave her any comfort. The animals seemed to sense her gentle nature, and working with them reminded her of happier times with her family. But the work was backbreaking. Besides caring for the horses, she had to haul water, repair fences, and help with the cattle. The guards watched constantly, ready to use their whips on anyone who moved too slowly or showed any sign of rebellion. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though. It was watching what happened to people who tried to resist. One young Navajo man named Tom tried to escape during his first week. When they caught him, they beat him so badly that he couldn't walk for a month. After that, he never spoke again, just stared at the ground and did whatever he was told. But Maria refused to let them break her spirit. Every night, as she lay on her pile of straw listening to the quiet sobs of the other prisoners, she made herself a promise. Someday, somehow she would find a way out of this place. She would escape, and when she did, she would make sure that Jeremiah Blackwood paid for what he had done to all of them. She didn't know it yet, but help was coming from an unexpected place. Far away in the desert, a young Navajo warrior had heard rumors about Blackwood's ranch. His name was Ahiga, and he had spent years hunting down men like Blackwood who stole and enslaved his people. Soon, their paths would cross in a way that would change both of their lives forever. For now, though, Maria endured. She survived each brutal day by holding on to hope and refusing to let Blackwood's cruelty destroy who she was inside. The chains might hold her body, but her spirit remained free, and that spirit would prove to be more powerful than any prison Blackwood could build. 3 months had passed since Maria arrived at Blackwood's ranch, and 50 miles away, a young Navajo warrior sat by his campfire listening to disturbing news. Ahiga was not like other men his age. At 25, he had already earned a reputation as one of the smartest and bravest fighters among his people. His name meant he fights in Navajo, and it suited him perfectly. But Ahiga didn't fight for glory or excitement. He fought because he had to. When he was 15, slave traders had kidnapped his younger sister, Ayana. She was only 12, with bright eyes and a laugh that could make anyone smile. One day she was there, helping their mother weave blankets and singing old songs. The next day she was gone. Ahiga and his father searched for months, following every trail and checking every trading post. They never found her. That loss changed Ahiga forever. He dedicated his life to rescuing other Navajo people who had been stolen from their families. In 10 years, he had saved over 40 people from slavery. Some called him a hero, but Ahiga didn't feel like a hero. Every person he saved reminded him of the one person he couldn't save, his sister. Now, an old friend named Joe was telling him about a new threat. "There's a white man named Blackwood," Joe said, his weathered face serious. "In the firelight. He's got a big ranch about 2 days' ride from here. My cousin's boy was taken there 3 weeks ago." Joe took a long drink from his water pouch before continuing. "But it's not just our people, Ahiga. This man, he's got Mexicans, black folks, even white people who ran away from somewhere else. He's turning that place into a prison." Ahiga felt the familiar anger rising in his chest. "How many people?" "Maybe 30, maybe more. And they're all chained up like animals." Joe's voice was filled with disgust. "The guards carry guns and whips. It's not going to be easy to get them out." But Ahiga had never backed down from a difficult rescue. "Tell me everything you know about this place." For the next hour, Joe described the layout of Blackwood's ranch. He drew maps in the dirt, showing where the buildings were and how many guards there might be. Ahiga listened carefully, already forming a plan in his mind. "I'll need to see it for myself first," Ahiga said finally. "I never go into a fight blind." 2 days later, Ahiga lay on his belly on top of a red rock hill, looking down at Blackwood's ranch through an old telescope he had traded for years ago. What he saw made his blood boil. The place looked exactly like Joe had described. A prison, disguised as a ranch. Ahiga could see people working in the yard, all of them wearing the heavy leg chains that marked them as slaves. Guards with rifles walked around the perimeter, and there were watchtowers at each corner of the compound. But as Ahiga watched, something caught his attention that Joe hadn't mentioned. There was a young woman working with the horses in the main corral. Even from a distance, Ahiga could see that she moved differently from the others. While most of the prisoners kept their heads down and moved slowly, this woman stood straight and worked with confidence. She wasn't broken like the others. Ahiga adjusted his telescope to get a better look. The woman had long, dark hair tied back with a piece of rope. Her clothes were dirty and torn, but she carried herself with dignity. When one of the horses got spooked and reared up, she calmed it with gentle words and steady hands. Ahiga had grown up around horses, and he could tell she really knew what she was doing. Then something happened that made Ahiga's hands tighten on his telescope. One of Blackwood's guards, a fat man with a scraggly beard, walked over to where the woman was working. Ahiga couldn't hear what he said, but he could see the guard pointing and yelling. The woman shook her head and continued working. The guard got angrier. He grabbed the woman by the arm and started dragging her away from the horses. That's when Ahiga saw her fight back. Even with the heavy chains on her legs, the woman twisted away from the guard and faced him boldly. She said something that made the guard's face turn red with anger. Without warning, he raised his hand and struck her across the face so hard that she fell to the ground. Ahiga felt something snap inside him. His hand moved automatically to the knife on his belt, and he had to fight the urge to charge down the hill right then and there. But he forced himself to stay calm. Getting himself killed wouldn't help anyone. The woman slowly got back to her feet. Ahiga expected her to cower or apologize, but instead, she looked the guard straight in the eye with such fierce defiance that even the guard seemed surprised. For a moment, they stared at each other. Then the guard muttered something under his breath and walked away, probably deciding she wasn't worth the trouble. But the woman's troubles weren't over. As Ahiga continued watching, he saw a small Native American boy, maybe 8 years old, collapse near the water well. The other prisoners looked around nervously, but none of them moved to help. They were all too afraid of the guards, except for the woman with the dark hair. Without hesitation, she hurried over to the fallen child, her chains clinking with each step. She knelt beside him and lifted his head, giving him water from her own small cup. The boy was clearly sick with fever, barely conscious. That's when Blackwood himself came out of the main house. Jeremiah Blackwood was a big man with pale skin and mean eyes. He walked over to where the woman was tending to the sick child and started yelling. Even from his hiding spot on the hill, Ahiga could hear the anger in Blackwood's voice. The woman stood up slowly, placing herself between Blackwood and the sick child. She said something to Blackwood that Ahiga couldn't make out, but whatever it was made the rancher furious. Blackwood pulled out a heavy leather whip and raised it above his head. The woman didn't flinch or beg for mercy. She just stood there protecting the child behind her, ready to take whatever punishment Blackwood wanted to give. In that moment, Ahiga felt something he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just anger at injustice or determination to rescue his people. It was something deeper, something that made his heart race and his hands shake. The woman reminded him of his mother and grandmother, the strong Navajo women who had raised him to believe that protecting others was more important than protecting yourself. But she also reminded him of his lost sister, Ayanna. Not in the way she looked, but in her spirit. Ayanna had always been the type of person who would help a hurt animal or stand up to bullies even when she was scared. Blackwood brought the whip down across the woman's back. She staggered but didn't fall. He hit her again and again. Other prisoners turned away, unable to watch. But the woman never cried out, never begged him to stop. She just endured it, making sure the sick child stayed safe behind her. Finally, Blackwood got tired and walked away, ordering his guards to get everyone back to work. The woman helped the sick boy to his feet and led him to the shade of a building. Only then did she allow herself to lean against the wall for a moment, clearly in pain from the beating. Ahiga lowered his telescope, his mind racing. He had come, here to gather information for a rescue mission, but now everything had changed. This wasn't just about saving his people anymore. It was about saving her. This brave woman who was willing to suffer to protect a child she didn't even know. That night, Ahiga made camp in a hidden canyon several miles from the ranch. He couldn't get the woman out of his mind. Who was she? How had she ended up at Blackwood's ranch? And most importantly, how could he get her out of there? He had rescued many people over the years, but this felt different. Personal. For the first time since his sister had been taken, Ahiga felt like he had found someone worth risking everything for. He didn't even know her name yet, but he had already decided that he would not leave this place without her. No matter what it took, no matter how dangerous it became, he would find a way to set her free. As he stared up at the stars that night, Ahiga began planning the most important rescue of his life. He just didn't know yet that the woman he wanted to save was planning her own form of resistance, and when their paths finally crossed, it would change both of their destinies forever. For 3 weeks after first seeing the woman at Blackwood's ranch, Ahiga couldn't stop thinking about her. He told himself he was just planning a rescue mission, but deep down he knew it was more than that. Every night, he found himself riding back to his lookout point on the hill, watching the ranch through his telescope. He learned her daily routine. Every morning, she was one of the first prisoners to wake up. She helped serve the thin soup that passed for breakfast, always making sure the children and elderly got a little extra when the guards weren't looking. Then she went to work with the horses, the job she seemed to love most. During the day, Ahiga watched her interact with the other prisoners. She had become like a mother figure to many of them, especially the younger ones. When someone got sick, she was there to help. When someone got beaten by the guards, she was there to clean their wounds. When someone lost hope, she was there to whisper words of encouragement. But what impressed Ahiga most was that she never lost her own spirit. Even after weeks of brutal treatment, even with heavy chains on her legs, she still stood tall. She still looked the guards in the eye. She still fought back when they tried to break her. One night, Ahiga decided he had to get closer. It was dangerous, but he was an expert at moving silently through the desert. He had been doing it since he was a boy, hunting rabbits and deer with his father. Now he used those same skills to hunt slave traders and rescue his people. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of guards walking their rounds. Ahiga counted their steps, timing their movements until he knew exactly when each area would be unguarded. Then, like a shadow, he slipped through the outer fence. His heart pounded as he crept closer to the prisoners' quarters. He could hear people breathing, some snoring, others crying quietly in their sleep. But he wasn't looking for the sleeping areas. He was looking for the well. Ahiga had noticed that the woman always made an extra trip to the well late at night, after the other prisoners were asleep. He guessed she was getting water for the sick boy she had protected, or maybe for some of the older prisoners who had trouble walking during the day. He waited in the shadows near the well, hoping she would come tonight like she had every other night. The minutes felt like hours. Then he heard it, the soft clinking of chains on stone. She appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, moving as quietly as possible despite the heavy shackles. In the moonlight, Ahiga could see her face clearly, for the first time. She was younger than he had thought, maybe 19 or 20. Her features were strong and beautiful, but her eyes held a sadness that made his heart ache. She lowered the bucket into the well and began pulling up water. That's when Ahiga made his decision. He stepped out of the shadows. The woman froze, her hand still on the rope. For a moment they just looked at each other across the moonlit yard. Ahiga expected her to scream, to run, to do something that would bring the guards running. But instead, she studied his face with those intelligent eyes. "Who are you?" she whispered in Spanish. Ahiga was surprised that she spoke so calmly. Most people would have been terrified to find a stranger lurking in the darkness. But this woman seemed more curious than afraid. "A friend," he answered back in Spanish, though his accent was heavy. "I have no friends here," she said quietly, but there was no bitterness in her voice. "Only other prisoners." "I know. That's why I came." They stared at each other for another long moment. Then the woman made a decision that surprised them both. Instead of running or calling for help, she gestured for him to come closer. "You're Navajo," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. My name is Ahiga. I'm Maria." She paused, then added, "Are you here for the children? The 3 Navajo boys in the back shed?" Ahiga nodded. "Among others." Maria's eyes lit up with something that might have been hope. "You've done this before. Rescued people." "Many times." "Good." Maria looked around to make sure no guards were near, then turned back to Ahiga. "Then you'll need to know about the new locks they put on the chains last week, and the extra guards they hired, and the dogs." For the next 10 minutes, Maria told him everything she had observed about the ranch's security. She knew which guards drank too much and fell asleep on duty. She knew when Blackwood traveled to town. She knew the best times to move around without being seen. But more than that, she told him about the people. "The little boy you saw me help," she said. "His name is Joseph. He's been sick for 2 weeks, but he's getting better. There's also an old woman named Rosa who can barely walk, and a man named Calvin, who has a bad cough that keeps getting worse." Ahiga listened carefully, impressed by how much she knew about everyone's condition. "You take care of all of them. Someone has to." Maria's voice was matter-of-fact, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We only have each other in this place." As they talked, Ahiga found himself drawn to more than just Maria's bravery. She was smart, observant, and caring. But there was also something else, a strength that reminded him of the women in his own family. "How did you end up here?" he asked. Maria's face darkened. "Raiders killed my father and brother. Sold me to a trader who sold me to Blackwood." Her voice was steady, but Ahiga could hear the pain underneath. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "I lost someone too. My sister." Maria looked at him with new understanding. "That's why you do this, rescue people." "Yes." They talked for another few minutes, sharing stories about their families and their lives before everything went wrong. Ahiga told her about growing up in a traditional Navajo home, learning to hunt and track from his father. Maria told him about her family's ranch and how much she loved working with horses. But their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. "Guard coming," Maria whispered urgently. Ahiga melted back into the shadows just as one of Blackwood's men appeared around the corner of a building. The guard looked suspicious when he saw Maria at the well. "What are you doing out here so late, girl?" "Getting water for the sick ones," Maria replied calmly, holding up her bucket. The guard grunted and continued his patrol. When he was gone, Ahiga emerged from his hiding place. "I have to go," he said. "When will you come back?" Maria asked, and Ahiga was surprised by the hope in her voice. "Soon. I need to plan this carefully." "Be careful," she said. "If they catch you, they'll kill you. If I don't try, you'll all die here anyway." Maria nodded, understanding the truth of his words. "There's something else you should know," she said. "Blackwood is planning to sell some of us next month. He's been talking about it with the guards." Ahiga felt a chill run through him. If Maria was sold to another owner, he might never find her again. Who is he planning to sell? The ones who cause trouble, the ones who don't break. She met his eyes. "Like me." In that moment, Ahiga made a decision that would change everything. This wouldn't just be a rescue mission, it would be a race against time. "I'll get you out before that happens," he promised. "Don't make promises you can't keep," Maria said. But there was a small smile on her face for the first time since he'd met her. "I always keep my promises." Over the next 2 weeks, Ahiga returned to the well 3 more times. Each visit was dangerous, But he couldn't stay away. Not only was he gathering information for the rescue, but he was also getting to know Maria better. They talked about everything, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Maria told him she used to dream of seeing the ocean, something she had never done. Ahiga told her about the sacred places in Navajo territory, the hidden canyons and ancient ruins that held the spirits of his ancestors. During their third meeting, something shifted between them. It was subtle, but they both felt it. When Ahiga reached out to steady Maria as she stumbled on her chains, their hands touched for just a moment. The connection was electric, surprising them both. "This is crazy," Maria whispered. "We barely know each other." "I know enough," Ahiga replied. "I know you're brave. I know you're kind. I know you refuse to give up even when everything seems hopeless. You don't understand. We're from different worlds. The only world that matters is the one where people like us help each other survive." But their growing connection was tested when Blackwood made his announcement. During the morning roll call, he told the prisoners that he would be taking 5 of them to a slave auction in the next town. Maria's name was on the list. That night, when Ahiga came to the well, Maria was waiting for him with tears in her eyes. "He's selling me in 3 days," she said. Ahiga felt something break inside his chest. The thought of losing Maria to some unknown buyer made him desperate. "Then we do this now," he said. "Tonight. You're not ready. You said you needed more time to plan. I'll make it work." Maria grabbed his arm. "No. If you rush this, you'll get yourself killed, and the rest of us will never have another chance. Wait until you're ready. What if I can't find you after he sells you? Then you'll save the others. The children need you more than I do." But even as she said the words, Maria knew she didn't want Ahiga to give up on her. Over the past few weeks, he had become more than just hope for rescue. He had become something she thought she would never have again, someone who cared about her as a person, not just as property. "I won't leave you," Ahiga said firmly. "No matter what happens, I'll find a way." The town of Deadwater was exactly what its name suggested, a dried-up, miserable place where desperate people came to buy and sell things that shouldn't be bought or sold. Ahiga watched from the shadows as Blackwood's wagon rolled down the dusty main street toward the auction house. His heart pounded as he saw Maria climb down from the wagon, still in chains. Even after weeks of brutal treatment, she held her head high. The other prisoners, 2 young Navajo men and an elderly Mexican woman, looked broken and defeated, but not Maria. She looked around the town with alert eyes, probably already planning some way to escape. Ahiga had followed them for 2 days, staying far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to never lose sight of the wagon. Now he needed to figure out how to get close to the auction house without being seen. But as he watched, something unexpected happened. A group of rough-looking men surrounded Blackwood's wagon. At first, Ahiga thought they might be more slave traders, but then he heard their angry voices. These men were upset about something, and they were not happy with Blackwood. "You owe us money, Blackwood," one of them shouted. 3 months now, and you keep making excuses." Ahiga moved closer, hiding behind a water trough where he could hear better. "I told you the money's coming," Blackwood replied, but his voice sounded nervous. "Soon as I sell these 5, I'll have enough to pay what I owe." "That's what you said last time. And the time before that." The leader of the angry men was a tall, thin fellow with a scar across his cheek. "We gave you cattle, on credit, Blackwood. Good cattle. Now you keep saying you don't have the money to pay for them. Business has been slow," Blackwood said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Business has been slow because you spend more time collecting slaves than raising cattle," Scarface replied. "And now everyone knows it. Nobody wants to do business with a slaver." The argument continued for several minutes, getting louder and angrier. Other people in the town started gathering around to watch. Ahiga realized this was the perfect distraction. While everyone was focused on the argument, he slipped closer, to where the prisoners were chained to the wagon. Maria saw him coming and gave the tiniest shake of her head, a warning that it was too dangerous. But Ahiga had an idea. In the confusion, he grabbed a handful of small rocks and threw them at the horses pulling a nearby wagon. The animals spooked and bolted down the street, causing even more chaos. People scattered, shouting and running after the runaway horses. In all the commotion, Ahiga was able to get close enough to whisper to Maria. "Tonight," he said quietly. "When they take you back to the holding pen behind the auction house, I'll be there." "It's too dangerous," Maria whispered. "Back. There are too many guards." "Trust me." Before Maria could argue, Ahiga melted back into the crowd. The argument between Blackwood and the cattle dealers was getting worse, and it looked like it might turn into a fight. Ahiga decided to make it even worse. He slipped around behind the angry men and untied their horses. The animals wandered off down the street, and when the men noticed, they became even more furious with Blackwood. "Now our horses are gone too," Scarface yelled. "This is all your fault, Blackwood." "I didn't touch your horses. Everything goes wrong when you're around." The argument turned into a pushing match, then into a full brawl. In the chaos, Blackwood lost control of his prisoners. The auction house workers had to come out and help get Maria and the others to safety in the holding pen. But the damage was done. Word spread quickly through the town that Blackwood was in trouble with his creditors. By evening, several potential buyers had backed out of the auction. The auctioneer was worried that he wouldn't be able to get good prices for any of the prisoners. That night, as Ahiga had planned, the security around the holding pen was lighter than usual. Most of the guards were inside the saloon, drinking and complaining about their boss's money problems. Ahiga waited until well after midnight, then made his move. The holding pen was a small wooden building behind the auction house. It had iron, bars on the windows, and a heavy lock on the door. But Ahiga had come prepared. From his saddlebags, he pulled out a small hacksaw that he had traded for months ago. Working as quietly as possible, he began cutting through the lock. The metal was thick, and it took nearly an hour of careful work. Every few minutes, he had to stop and listen for guards, but luck was on his side. The men inside the saloon were too drunk to pay attention to their duties. Finally, the lock gave way. Ahiga slowly opened the door. Inside, 5 people sat chained to the wall. They looked up at him with a mixture of hope and fear. Maria's eyes went wide when she saw him. "I told you, I keep my promises," he whispered. Working quickly, Ahiga used a heavy hammer he had brought to break the chains. The noise seemed terrifyingly loud in the quiet night, but no one came to investigate. "Can you all walk?" he asked quietly. The 2 young Navajo men nodded eagerly. The elderly woman looked weak but determined. The 4th prisoner, a middle-aged black man, seemed dazed but alert. "There are horses tied up behind the general store," Ahiga whispered. "Can you make it that far?" "We can make it anywhere," Maria said firmly. But as they crept out of the building, they heard voices approaching. 2 guards were walking back from the saloon, probably coming to check on the prisoners. "This way," Ahiga whispered, leading them away from the voices. They made it to the horses just as the guards discovered the empty holding pen. Shouts erupted from behind them, and soon the whole town would be awake and searching. "Ride hard," Ahiga told the others. "Follow the North Star. Stay together, I'll catch up with you." "Where are you going?" Maria asked, grabbing his arm. "To buy us some time." Before she could stop him, Ahiga disappeared back into the darkness. He had one more job to do before they could escape safely. The auction house was built of old, dry wood. It would burn easily. Ahiga had brought a small container of lamp oil for exactly this purpose. Working quickly, he splashed oil around the base of the building and struck a match. The flames caught immediately and spread faster than he had expected. Within minutes, the entire building was blazing. The fire lit up the night sky like a giant torch, and soon people were running from all directions with buckets of water. But Ahiga wasn't done. The general store, the saloon, the livery stable, he set fire to them all. Not to hurt innocent people, but to create so much chaos that no one would be able to organize a proper pursuit of the escaped prisoners. By the time he made it back to his horse, half the town was on fire. People were running everywhere, trying to save their buildings and belongings. No one was thinking about 5 escaped slaves. Ahiga rode hard to catch up with the others. He found them 3 miles north of town, hiding in a grove of cottonwood, trees near a stream. They had been waiting for him, unwilling to leave without knowing he was safe. "Is everyone all right?" he asked. "We're free," Maria said, and for the first time since he had met her, she was smiling. "We're actually free." But Ahiga knew their troubles were far from over. "Blackwood will come after us, and when he finds his town burned, he'll bring every man he can hire." "Then we better not be here when he arrives," said one of the young Navajo men. They rode through the night, following deer trails and dry creek beds that would hide their tracks. The elderly woman struggled to keep up, but she refused to slow them down. The middle-aged man, who told them his name was Robert, turned out to be an experienced horseman despite his years in captivity. As the sun rose, they stopped to rest in a hidden canyon that Ahiga knew well. They were still in dangerous territory, but at least they had water and shelter. "How far to safety?" Maria asked. 2 more days to Navajo territory," Ahiga replied. "But Blackwood won't follow us there. He knows better." While the others rested, Ahiga and Maria sat by the stream. For the first time since they had met, they could talk without fear of being overheard. "Why did you burn the town?" Maria asked. "To give us time to get away?" "And because—" Ahiga paused, looking for the right words. "Because I was angry. That place represented everything wrong with this territory. People buying and selling other people like they were cattle." Maria nodded. "My father always said that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Is that what you think we did? Fought fire with fire? I think we fought evil with justice. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Both of them knew that their real journey was just beginning. They had saved 5 people, but there were still dozens more back at Blackwood's ranch. "We have to go back," Maria said suddenly. Ahiga looked at her in surprise. "What?" "The others. The children, the sick ones, all the people we left behind. We can't just abandon them. Maria, it's too dangerous. Blackwood will be expecting an attack now. He'll double his guards, maybe bring in more men. Then we'll have to be smarter than he is." Ahiga studied her face. The soft morning light made her look younger, but her eyes held a determination that impressed him. "You could be safe now. I could take you to Mexico or to California. You could start a new life." "What kind of life would that be? Knowing we left those people to suffer?" In that moment, Ahiga realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. He was falling in love with this brave woman who refused to think of her own safety when others needed help, and he knew that. 3 weeks after the burning of Deadwater, Ahiga sat around a campfire with 12 of his most trusted warriors. They were hidden in a canyon 50 miles from Blackwood's ranch, planning the most ambitious rescue mission any of them had ever attempted. "You're sure about this?" asked Tom, Ahiga's closest friend since childhood. "We're talking about attacking a fortified position with at least 20 armed guards." "I'm sure," Ahiga replied, looking at each man around the fire. "Those people have suffered long enough." Next to him, Maria studied the map they had drawn in the dirt. Over the past weeks, she had helped plan every detail of the assault. Her knowledge of the ranch's layout and routines made her invaluable, but Ahiga worried about her insistence on joining the attack. "You should stay here," he said for the 10th time. "This is going to be dangerous." "We've already discussed this," Maria replied firmly. "I know where everything is. I know which prisoners need medical attention, and I know which guards are the most dangerous." "She's right," said Robert, the man they had rescued from Deadwater. He had refused to leave when Ahiga offered to take him to safety, insisting on joining the mission to free the others. "We need someone who knows the inside of that place." The other rescued prisoners had also chosen to stay and help. The 2 young Navajo men, James and Paul, were eager to rescue their cousin, who was still trapped at the ranch. Even the elderly woman Rosa had insisted on coming along to help care for the children once they were freed. But it was Maria who had surprised everyone with her tactical knowledge and fierce determination. She had studied every aspect of Blackwood's operation and identified its weaknesses. "The guards get lazy during the night shift," she explained, pointing to the map. especially on cold nights when they'd rather stay inside. And Blackwood usually drinks heavily after dinner so he won't be alert if something goes wrong. What about the dogs? Asked James. 3 of them, Maria replied. But they know me. I fed them scraps when I could. They might not bark if they see me first. Ahiga admired her planning, but he still worried. If something goes wrong, if we get separated, you need to run. Don't try to be a hero. Maria looked at him with those steady eyes that had first captured his attention. I could say the same thing to you. The plan they had developed was complex but necessary. Unlike their escape from dead water, this mission couldn't rely on chaos and luck. They would need precision timing and careful coordination. Tom and 4 warriors would create a distraction on the east side of the ranch, making noise and setting small fires to draw the guards' attention. Meanwhile, Ahiga, Maria, and the rest of the group would enter from the west where the prisoners' quarters were located. Remember, Ahiga told them, we're not just rescuing people. We're destroying this place forever. Every building, every fence, everything that makes this ranch a prison. 2 nights later, on a moonless evening when storm clouds hid the stars, they put their plan into action. Maria's heart pounded as they crept through the darkness toward the ranch. It felt strange to be returning to this place that had caused her so much pain. But now, instead of chains, she carried a key that Ahiga had made from memory. A key that would open the locks on the prisoner's shackles. The ranch looked exactly as she remembered, but somehow smaller now that she was returning, as a free woman instead of a captive. The guard towers loomed against the dark sky, and she could see the faint glow of lanterns in the windows. There, she whispered, pointing to a gap in the fence that she had noticed during her time as a prisoner. That's where we can get in without being seen. They slipped through the fence one by one, moving like shadows across the ground. Maria led them toward the prisoners' quarters, avoiding the areas where guards typically patrolled. As they got closer, Maria could hear familiar sounds. People coughing, children crying softly, the rattle of chains against wooden floors. Her anger flared as she remembered what it felt like to be helpless in this place. The children are in the shed on the left, she whispered to Ahiga. The adults are in the building next to it. How many guards inside? Usually 2 at night, sometimes 3 if Blackwood is feeling paranoid. They waited in the shadows until they heard Tom's distraction begin on the other side of the ranch. Shouts erupted from the guard towers, and they could see men running toward the east fence with rifles and lanterns. Now, Ahiga whispered. They moved quickly toward the prisoners' quarters. Maria's key worked perfectly on the first lock, and the door swung open silently. Inside, she could see dozens of people sleeping on straw beds, all of them wearing the heavy chains she remembered so well. Wake up, she whispered urgently. But stay quiet. We're here to help. The prisoners stirred, and Maria saw recognition in many eyes. Some looked hopeful, others seemed afraid that this was some kind of trick. It's really Maria, whispered an old man named Vicente. She's come back for us. Where have you been? Asked little Joseph, the sick boy she had protected from Blackwood's whip. Getting help, Maria replied, beginning to unlock his chains. Now we're all leaving together. As they worked to free the prisoners, more shouts erupted from the other side of the ranch. Tom's distraction was working perfectly, but they didn't have much time before the guards figured out what was really happening. Ahiga and his men moved efficiently through the building, breaking chains and helping people to their feet. Many of the prisoners were weak from poor food and treatment, but all of them were determined to escape. Can everyone walk? Ahiga asked quietly. We'll crawl if we have to, replied a young woman Maria remembered as Anna. The horses are waiting. In the canyon beyond the north fence, Maria told them. Follow James and Paul, they know the way. As the prisoners began filing out of the building, Ahiga pulled Maria aside. Time to finish this. They had saved almost everyone, but their work wasn't done. Following their plan, they began setting fires throughout the ranch. The stables, the guard towers, the main house where Blackwood lived. Everything went up in flames. But as they were setting fire to the last building, something went wrong. Blackwood himself appeared around the corner, holding a rifle and looking more dangerous than Maria had ever seen him. His face was twisted with rage and his eyes were wild. "I should have known," he snarled, pointing the gun at Maria. "The troublemaker comes back to cause more trouble." "Let her go," Ahiga said, stepping between them. "Your fight is with me." "My fight is with anyone who steals my property," Blackwood replied. "Do you have any idea how much money you've cost me?" "Those people aren't property," Maria said, her voice steady, despite the gun pointed at her. "They're human beings. Human beings who belong to me." Blackwood's finger tightened on the trigger. That's when the building behind him exploded in flames. The fire had reached something flammable inside, and the whole structure went up like a giant torch. The explosion knocked Blackwood off balance, and Ahiga lunged forward. The two men fought for control of the rifle. They rolled on the ground, struggling desperately as the fire spread around them. Maria wanted to help, but she couldn't get close enough without risking being shot. Finally, Ahiga managed to knock the gun away. Blackwood tried to draw a knife, but he was no match for a warrior who had been fighting his whole life. With one powerful blow, Ahiga knocked the rancher unconscious. "Leave him," Maria said as Ahiga started to tie Blackwood up. "The fire will do the rest." "No," Ahiga replied, dragging the unconscious man away from the flames. "We're not murderers. We'll leave him for the law to deal with." They tied Blackwood to a tree far enough from the fire to be safe, then hurried to catch up with the escaped prisoners. Behind them, the entire ranch burned like a massive bonfire, lighting up the night sky for miles around. The journey to safety took 4 days. They traveled slowly because many of the rescued prisoners were weak and needed frequent rest. But Maria had never seen people so determined to keep moving. Even the children walked without complaining, understanding that every step took them further from slavery. Ahiga's knowledge of the desert trails kept them hidden from any pursuit. They followed hidden canyons and dry riverbeds, stopping at water sources that only the Navajo knew about. At night, they camped in caves and overhangs that provided shelter and concealment. During those 4 days, Maria watched Ahiga interact with the rescued prisoners and began to understand what kind of man he really was. He was patient with the elderly and gentle with the children. He shared his own food with those who needed it most. He never complained about the slow pace or the extra danger that came with traveling in such a large group. "You've done this before," she said one evening as they sat by a small, carefully hidden campfire. "Many times, but never with so many people at once. And never with someone like me." Ahiga looked at her across the firelight. "No, never with someone like you." Over the past weeks, their relationship had deepened from mutual respect to something much stronger. They had fought together, planned together, and risked their lives together. But it was more than shared danger that bound them. They had discovered that they thought alike, valued the same things, and shared the same dreams of justice and freedom. "What happens now?" Maria asked. "Now we reach Navajo territory and everyone gets to choose their own future." "What about us? What's our future?"